Somewhere in the last few years, the water we're swimming in changed, and most people haven't fully noticed yet because it didn't arrive as one obvious event. It arrived as a slow, steady rise in the level of synthetic content surrounding everything we read, watch, and consume. Text that sounds human but isn't, images that look real but never happened, voices, opinions, even emotions generated at a scale no individual mind can fully track anymore. This isn't a video about avoiding AI, we've covered that ground. This is about something quieter and, in some ways, more urgent. What happens to your own clarity when the entire environment around your mind becomes saturated with material that was never actually thought or felt by anyone? Clarity used to be something you protected from a handful of obvious distractions. Now it has to be protected from an ocean, and I want to walk you through exactly what that requires. Section 1. Understanding what saturation actually means. It's worth being precise here because saturation is a genuinely different problem than the one most people picture when they think about AI. This isn't about one tool you consciously choose to open. It's about an ambient condition, synthetic content now appearing inside your search results, your social feeds, your customer service conversations, your news. Often without any clear marker telling you which is which. The mind wasn't built for this particular environment. It evolved to trust patterns. If something sounds coherent, confident, and human, treat it as reliable because for nearly all of human history, that pattern held. Saturation breaks that pattern completely, without breaking the instinct that relied on it. Which means you're now navigating a world using an internal compass that was calibrated for a reality that no longer fully exists. This is the actual problem underneath all the smaller symptoms, not that AI exists, but that its output has become so pervasive and so fluent that the old signals your mind used to separate real from artificial have quietly stopped working as reliably as they used to. Section 2. The fog between what's real and what's generated. One of the first casualties of saturation is your confidence in your own perception, and this shows up in a specific, uncomfortable way. You read something and a part of you pauses, not sure whether a person actually wrote it or something generated it in seconds. You see an image and hesitate before believing it depicts something that actually happened. This hesitation, multiplied across dozens of small moments every single day, produces a kind of low-grade cognitive fog. A background uncertainty that never fully resolves because there's rarely a clean, definitive way to check. Most people don't consciously register this fog, they just feel generally more tired, more skeptical, more disconnected from a felt sense of what's true, without necessarily tracing that feeling back to its actual source. Left unaddressed, this fog doesn't stay contained to the content you're evaluating, it starts to leak into your broader sense of certainty about anything. Because a mind that's constantly uncertain about small things gradually loses its confidence in larger judgments too. Clarity requires actively naming this fog for what it is, an environmental condition, not a personal failure of perception. And building specific habits designed to cut through it deliberately rather than hoping it resolves on its own. Section 3. The quiet homogenization of your own taste. Here's a subtler cost that almost nobody discusses, and it concerns not what you believe, but what you find beautiful, interesting, or worth paying attention to in the first place. When an enormous share of what you consume, day after day, was generated to optimize for broad engagement rather than genuine originality, your own sense of taste starts to drift toward whatever that optimization process favors. You start finding the smoothed, predictable version of things more comfortable than the genuinely original, because you've been steadily trained on an environment saturated with the former. This isn't dramatic or sudden, it's the same slow erosion we've talked about in other contexts, except here what's eroding isn't a skill, it's your actual aesthetic and intellectual preferences. The things that make your perspective genuinely yours rather than an average of everything you've recently been shown. Protecting this requires deliberately seeking out material that wasn't optimized for mass engagement at all, older writing, unpolished work. Perspectives that are strange or difficult rather than immediately comfortable. Specifically because that friction is what keeps your own taste from quietly flattening into whatever the algorithm has decided most people will tolerate. Section 4. Rebuilding the discipline of unmediated thought. If saturation is the environment, the antidote has to be deliberate exposure to its opposite, real stretches of time where no synthetic content, no feed, no generated response is shaping what's moving through your mind. This sounds simple, and it is genuinely difficult to practice consistently because silence without input has become an uncomfortable, almost unfamiliar state for a lot of people. But this is precisely where clarity actually gets rebuilt, not through consuming more carefully selected content, but through consuming nothing at all for a while and letting your own mind generate its own material without any external scaffolding. Take a walk with no audio, sit with a genuinely difficult question, and let your own thoughts arrive slowly instead of reaching for an instant answer. Write by hand for a few minutes before consulting anything external, so you can see what your own unmediated thinking actually sounds like before it gets blended with everyone else's. This isn't about romanticizing the past or rejecting these tools. It's about maintaining regular contact with your own mind operating independently, because that contact is exactly what erodes first and quietest in a saturated environment. Section 5. Depth over the illusion of being informed. Saturation also changes how information reaches you, favoring breadth, constant, skimmable exposure to an enormous volume of material, over depth, genuine, sustained engagement with a smaller number of sources you actually trust and understand thoroughly. This produces a specific illusion, the feeling of being well-informed simply because you've encountered an enormous quantity of headlines, summaries, and fragments. When in reality, fragmented exposure rarely produces actual understanding. It produces the sensation of understanding without the substance underneath it. Clarity requires deliberately reversing this ratio, choosing fewer sources, going deeper into them, actually reading the full piece instead of the summary, actually sitting with a complete argument instead of a fragment extracted to maximize engagement. This will feel slower, and it is slower, but the understanding you build this way is durable in a way that skimmed fragments never are, because it was built through your own sustained engagement rather than assembled from 100 disconnected pieces, each individually plausible but never actually integrated into anything you could genuinely reason from. Section 6. Trusting your own felt sense again. The last piece of this, and maybe the most important, is rebuilding trust in something that saturation quietly undermines: your own internal sense of whether something feels true, feels right, feels aligned with what you actually value. In a saturated environment, this internal compass gets treated as unreliable, something to override in favor of whatever external source sounds most confident or most polished. But that compass, imperfect as it is still yours, built from your own accumulated experience, and it deserves a real vote in your thinking, not automatic deference to whatever generated content happens to be presented most fluently. Practicing this means pausing regularly and asking yourself directly what you actually think or feel about something before you check any external source at all, and taking that answer seriously even when it's rough or uncertain. Over time, this rebuilds a kind of confidence that saturation specifically tends to erode, the confidence that your own perception, your own judgment, your own taste still matters, still deserves to be consulted first, even in an environment increasingly designed to answer every question before you've had the chance to ask it of yourself. Closing. Clarity as ongoing maintenance. What I want you to understand is that clarity was never a state you achieve once and then keep permanently, and that's especially true now. It's something you maintain actively, the same way you'd maintain physical health, through consistent, deliberate practices rather than a single decision made once and forgotten. In a world this saturated with synthetic material, that maintenance matters more than it ever has, because the environment is no longer neutral. It's actively pulling your perception, your taste, and your confidence in a direction that was never actually yours to begin with. None of this requires rejecting the tools that created this saturation in the first place. That would be both impossible and unnecessary. It requires something quieter, a daily discipline of returning to your own unmediated thought, seeking depth over the illusion of being informed, and trusting the internal compass that's been yours the entire time, underneath all the noise. That compass hasn't disappeared. It's just waiting for you to consult it first before anything else gets the chance to answer on your behalf.